Good evening and greetings from INTACH Chennai chapter. I'm Sujata Shankar, convener. I'm delighted to welcome each of you here this evening, members and friends of INTACH. A special welcome and a big thanks to Mrs. Tara Gandhi for being here today and to share her wisdom on birds. Thanks to Ashwita for being the gracious host yet again. Before any formal introduction, I'd like to take a moment to remember a friend of INTACH who unfortunately passed away end of March. Professor Terada Yoshitaka, ethnomusicologist from Osaka in Japan, with deep interest in India, he gave us a new perspective for our pet project of revival of shadow puppetry of our region through a comparative study with puppetry in Cambodia. We recall with gratitude his deep insights into puppetry. A brief about INTACH, which is an acronym for the Indian National Trust for Art and Cultural Heritage. INTACH was established in 1984, 39 years ago, as a not-for-profit organization. INTACH's mission to conserve heritage is based on the belief that living in harmony with heritage enhances quality of life. It is stated in the Constitution of India, Article 51A(f), that, open quotes, it shall be the duty of every citizen of India to value and preserve the rich heritage of our composite culture, close quotes. Can we, as citizens of India, preserve and conserve our heritage? Can we inculcate in the younger generation a sense of pride in our heritage? Can we bring heritage education to the forefront and thus ensure a long-term concern for heritage? Can we keep alive our living heritage and support traditional crafts and communities? Can we care for our built environment, our monuments, and landmarks by initiating their conservation? We have over 200 chapters nationwide, and it is through the passion and strength of volunteers of all these chapters, as well as the expertise of the various divisions of INTACH in Delhi, including natural heritage, that we at INTACH take its vision forward. At Chennai chapter, we have through talks, walks, quizzes, and other programs and initiatives been creating awareness about the significance of our heritage. In the recent past, of course, online, and now back to being in person. And thank you all for being here. Today, we bring focus on our birds, which is a very important part of our natural heritage. Coincidence has it that last week, when I was rummaging through my cupboard, I found an old newspaper clipping tucked away, which was on birds, and I thought I'll share it with you. I'm not sure who it's written by, but I'll just read the poem. A rushing, a rustling amid green foliage, the sharp call of a bird of paradise, then a burst of color, bright, preened plumage, and then the flight, wheeling, twisting in the skies, a dot in the azure, blurred landscape below, rushing air, fluffy clouds, to go as you please, oh, to be a bird. Who is better known than ornithologist Salim Ali for his lifelong work on birds and crusade for their conservation? In an era when communication was most effective via the radio, he delivered dozens of radio broadcasts over 4 decades between the years 1941 and 1985. These radio talks have been collated and edited by Mrs. Tara Gandhi in the book Words for Birds. I have pleasure in introducing Mrs. Tara Gandhi. Tara Gandhi is an ornithologist and conservationist and had the fortune of having been Dr. Salim Ali as her guide for her MSc degree in zoology with specialization in field ornithology. She can be termed a true member of the INTACH family as her initial work experience was with INTACH's Natural Heritage Division in Delhi. She's worked for the biodiversity conservation programs of organizations in India and abroad and has surveyed wildlife protected areas across the country, including Andaman and Nicobar and Lakshadweep Islands. Currently, she is Vice Chair of Wildlife Trust of India and serves on committees of the Bombay Natural History Society, Madras Naturalist Society, and the Institutional Ethics Committee of the IIT Madras. She has authored books, scientific and popular articles, including Nature Stories for Children, and is the editor of a two-volume anthology of Dr. Salim Ali's writings, and today's topic, a collection of Salim Ali's radio talks. We eagerly look forward to Mrs. Gandhi's words about birds. Welcome and over to you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Srilata Sankar. I can't tell you how privileged and delighted I am to be here today. And I feel I've come a full circle. As she mentioned, one of my first jobs, in fact, the first job ever that I had, which was to do with nature at all, was with the Natural Heritage Cell of INTACH, where I worked for 4 years. It was Salim Ali who introduced me and got me that job. So for me, it is extremely special to be back here and to be addressing a group of belonging to INTACH, which really is, I feel, very much at home. Thank you so much for inviting me and for letting me share what I have to say about Salim Ali's Words for Birds. So without much ado, um, if I may continue like this. What is interesting about Salim Ali is that, you know, he's so well known, he was so famous, and most scientists are not as famous as he. He was practically a household name, at least for my generation and maybe my generation before that. And what is lovely to know is that even people of the lesser generations or rather future generations are kind of finding his name quite familiar and interesting. So what made him famous was this book, The Book of Indian Birds, which he wrote in way back in 1941. And it became a bestseller. Uh, and it's quite surprising that such a book should become a bestseller because it was all about birds, such a limited subject. But I think it's because of his style of writing and the way he described the birds and made them interesting. It became very popular and it went into several editions. I have the 13th edition with me. I'm sure there are more than that. Apart from that, he also wrote a number of books, and he wrote articles. He wrote, little stories. I mean, he wrote for smaller magazines and for newspapers, just to spread the word about birds in India. And of course, his magnum opus was this. This, I don't know if you can see the big volume of seven. It's a 10-volume handbook of Indian birds of Pakistan and India. And of course, it's not a handbook at all because you can't hold it in one hand. It's 10 volumes, huge, big volumes. You need a backpack or you need a shoulder bag or a suitcase to carry it around in. I don't know why it's called handbook, but there it is. And of course, during his lifetime itself, um, he was so well known. And later on, there were books written about him. There's even an Amar Chitra Katha about Salim Ali, which is quite interesting. And he got the Padma Vibhushan later in his life, and he was also nominated for the Rajya Sabha, which is so, I mean, what was good was during his lifetime, he got very well recognized as a scientist and as an important person in India. So, but what was less known about him? We knew all these things. Called father of Indian ornithology, he was called Birdman of India, and all that. But we didn't know that he was such a good communicator. He really wanted to spread the word about birds, about nature, and through birds about nature in general. And so he could reach out to people of all walks of life. He could communicate with Rajas and Maharajas, with bureaucrats, with farmers, with children. He had this great outreach and this great talent to do that. And so he says here, so he gave these radio talks. And what is the best medium, as Sujata Shankar said, the best medium at that time? There was no internet, there was no TV. He used radio. And those of us, I mean, of my age could remember that the radio is on all the time. Either listening Binaka Geetmala or news or something we were always listening to. So it was a very powerful medium of communication those days. So he used that medium and to describe the birds and a phenomenal range of subjects he covers. And he says the object of these talks is really to interest listeners in the first instance for the healthy pleasure and satisfaction that bird watching affords, rather than for its intrinsic scientific possibilities. So he kind of he sort of takes away the fear of science. He just brings it into very simple language for people of all walks of life. So, on a personal note, how did this book come about? Is that I had, as a student, I had access, and also as a researcher, I had access to his archival papers. And he's such a meticulous person, he had filed them all away in very carefully. So among those papers, I found the sheet that said radio talks. And it had every radio talk that he'd given over the past over 40 years, 35, 40 radio talks, the date, the title of it, where it was broadcast, which radio station, all that. So it was very thrilling for me, and I was wondering where I could get the substance of it. So I contacted Bombay Natural History Society, and they had actually scanned all the scripts. And so you can see over here his own, he used to type, of course, those days no PC and all that, so he would type it out himself, all the scripts of these radio talks, and corrected them by hand. And he'd note on top over there, you can see, I don't know whether this cursor is working. Is it working, the cursor? Maybe. Right on top, written it in little, in beautiful handwriting, where it was, where he delivered the lecture, where it was broadcast, and all that. And he timed it to be exactly 14 minutes. So I must also follow his example and not go beyond the time that has been given to me. But it was brilliant. Every talk was exactly 14 minutes. So I managed to, say whatever he wanted to say within that time. So it really comes through in these talks, which are collected in this book, that his desire to reach out to people, to communicate, and in fact is very, and also to tell people, not that birds are just beautiful things or they are part of your life, etc., but how valuable they are, to humans, for the economy, for ecology, for human well-being. He wanted to convey that, and in fact, his very first lecture, which he gave in Lahore in 1941 in undivided India at that time, was called Birds as a National Asset. So he talks about them as a national treasure and a national asset. And for me, it was like opening a treasure chest to see all these scripts and to read them and to remember him after so many years. Yeah. So, the way he made it interesting was to, I think he targeted different audiences. And one of the audiences he targeted was children who didn't even know English. So he spoke in Hindustani. And how he made it interesting, say, some birds are like tailors, they stitch their nests. Some birds are like weavers, they weave their nests. Some birds are like masons, they build with mud. So like that, he, captures the children's imagination, all in Hindustani, so nicely written and so nicely said. So, and in between, he recounts very amusing instances about himself, his adventures and what he did, things like that. And he laughs at himself also. He says, I look like one scruffy, khaki clad garage mechanic. And so he also recounts that sometimes when he goes about his binoculars looking very shady, they thought that he was, he was a spy or something. So all these kind of funny incidents he brings out in his radio talks, which is nice. And somebody said, you look like a but a very small made man, very small made thin man, and he had this famous hook nose. So people said, "You look like a bird yourself, Salim Saab." Maybe because I sing very sweetly, but actually he had a very crackly voice. He didn't have a singing voice at all. So he made fun of himself. So now, if we want to know about Salim Ali's work and about we have to set him in the context of his times. He was born in 1896, and so he was really a 20th century man. He lived for 91 years. He had a long life of 91. So he was a 20th century man, and he saw the entire, India in the 20th century was a very exciting and changing place all the time. So this is when he belonged to this very wonderful, very sophisticated family in Bombay, and they were very supportive of him all his life. He was an orphan, and his uncles and aunts looked after him along with his many siblings. And they brought him up, and so you can see them, little Salim. I don't know if you can see over here. I wish I had a little thing. I can see a little circle that is little Salim Ali sitting ensconced in his family out there. They were, they were academics, they were business people, they were civil servants, and even involved politically. So he belonged to a really wonderful family. And as a boy, he was not interested in studies at all. Apparently, he himself says in autobiography, "I'm not interested in studies. I hated maths, but I did want to be an ornithologist, and I wanted to be a big game hunter." And like any little boy, he wanted to go shooting and all that sort of stuff. In those times, if you think of 1910, 1908, like those days, hunting was considered actually quite a thing to do, sophisticated, fashionable thing to do. And people who belonged to a certain strata, who hobnobbed with the British and the civil servants and all, and the Rajas, Maharajas, they'd all go on hunts and shoots, and it was accepted those days. It was accepted. So he also went along with his uncles and aunts, uncles for shooting, and he enjoyed it. He confessed that he actually enjoyed it. And but uh, how did it start? In fact, one of his talks, he answers the question, "How did you get interested in birds?" It is a common subject that people have asked him. So he recounts how he got interested in birds. Because at the age of 10 or 9, he was gifted with an air gun by one of his uncles. And he used it to shoot little sparrows and birds in the garden. And his interest was then to shoot those sparrows and take them to cook to make a snack. So that was his great interest in birds at that time. So he'd shoot these sparrows and take them, and the cook would very kindly make little snacks for these children out of it. But one sparrow that he noticed had this little yellow patch on his throat. I don't know if you can see it in the picture. And so he got curious. Little boy got curious. What is this? And he took it to his. He didn't take it to the cook. He took it to his uncles and said, "No, can you see what is this bird?" So they said, "We don't know. Why don't you take it to Bombay Natural History Society, and there they may be able to identify it for you." So he took it, and they were very kind. They identified it. It's called the yellow-throated sparrow, different from the house sparrow. So look what he says. He says, "Like ripples from a pebble dropped in water, the circles of my interest in ornithology widened." And the way he puts it is so beautiful, that he was already had this interest, but it just widened after this particular incident, and he was even more determined to continue with that. But as he grew up, he realized that there was no scope for ornithological study in India at that time, during those days in the 30s and 40s. And of course, he got married at the age of 25, whatever, and he didn't really have any particular job. He was not interested. His family tried to put him into chartered accountancy, and he didn't do well in that. They tried to give him little jobs in their businesses in Burma and here and there, mining business and wood business and many businesses they had. But he just didn't take to any of those things. His heart really was not there. And then everybody was worried, and he himself was worried. He got married, and this girl that he married, Temina, she was from a very sophisticated elite family who'd grown up in England. And she'd been to finishing school, all that. But Salim Ali says, luckily, finishing school didn't finish her off. And she was very much, she was very much in tune with his interests. She shared his interests. Another interest that they both had as a couple was poetry. So so they were so they got on really well, and she accompanied him everywhere. She was really a wonderful companion for Salim Ali. So about at the age of 30, when he didn't really have a job, he tried various jobs, like like a guide in a museum and things, and he didn't like it at all. And he was determined he wanted to study, and there was no way in India. So he went off to Germany for 2 years. And there is when his academic and proper training began in ornithology, and he learned under these wonderful, great teachers, German teachers, who were really, very well-known ornithologists. And he learned various techniques. How do you study a bird? How do you know what it's eating? How do you relate it to its environment? How do you study migration? And all that he learned for the very first time. He had an interest, but he didn't. He needed to professionalize it, which he did when he went to Germany. So he comes back from Germany, and he's again jobless. So his family supports him, supports the young couple, and they look after him. And then he says, he gets the idea of covering the whole country. He wants to go all over the country and note the birds. So he gets grants from the royal families, like the Mysore, erstwhile Mysore state, the Kerala state, and central India, the Rajasthan, all the royal families. He tells them that I will note the birds in your area. And they gave him infrastructure support. He didn't want to earn anything from there, but he just got the infrastructure support to scour length and breadth the country. And he went off on these amazing expeditions with his wife, and you can see Temina peeping out from that little coach. It's called the Travancore, some rail, and they make that into a home. They make camps, tents and things in the jungle, their home. And apparently she used to bring flowers and decorate it and make it look as homely as possible. And she went with him everywhere, complaining, which is absolutely marvelous. And she said he made no money from all this, but Tamina accompanied him, and she adjusted to everything. And so then he goes to the far east to the Run of Kutch. He goes to the far west to Run of Kutch, and for the east to Chilika Lake, and north and south here to the Western Ghats. And he even crosses over the Himalaya on foot. He goes on elephant back and camel back. You can see boats, all sorts of different adventures he has. And I mean, you must be wondering why we're talking so much about Salim Ali's life, but it's integrated. His life and his work and his writing and his speaking are all of one. He speaks about his adventures, speaks about what he saw, the people he met, and all that, and how he crossed on foot. That Lipu Lake pass, over which you cross and get into the Tibetan plateau. And he said, I wanted to go there to study the natural conditions under which birds live on the roof of the world, and to ascertain at first hand what species breed in that area. So he wanted to know, because those species come to the mainland, to Indian peninsula in the winter when it's frozen over there. They come down here. So in India, we are so lucky to have this extraordinary variety of ecosystems. Our biodiversity is absolutely phenomenal. And so over here we have, on the extreme left, you see the cold desert. Below that, you see the hot desert. You see mangroves. You see the seashore. We have dense rainforests in the Western Ghats and in the Eastern Ghats. We have snow-clad mountains. So we are so fortunate to have all these ecosystems, and each of these has its own set of birds, which is why Salim Ali wanted to go to each of these places and to record what birds were there. Now, if you take a bird that belongs to the desert, it can never survive in a mangrove forest, and vice versa. So he wanted to know what lives where and how it relates to its environment. That was his main, uh, you know, passion. He was not particularly interested in how long its tail was or how sharp its nails were, but he really wanted to know its behavior in relation to its own environment. So that's where he went all over the country. They said there's not 1 inch of the country which he didn't go to. Of course, that's an exaggeration, but that's what they say of Salim Ali. So he loved the great outdoors, and he was even this he though he was so well known as a scientist and well recognized, he still was just basic an outdoors man. He just loved being out there, and he wanted people to also understand. And his own contemporaries like Madhav Gadgil professor has said of him that Salim Ali was the man who taught Indians to appreciate, to study at first hand, to treasure, and to work towards conserving the rich living heritage of this country. Which is again what Ms. Sujata Shankar said, the living natural heritage of the country is so much part of the culture and nature are part the same coin, two sides the same coin is what they say, and that's what INTACH also had taught me to understand. And he says that we must look after the natural living heritage of our country. And of course, he also jokes and said, no, ornithology is Cinderella of the of the of biological sciences because nobody was particularly interested. So he said that hard-boiled professional zoologists were inclined to look down on bird watching as merely a silly way of killing time by the idle rich. So he said, since there were no jobs with ornithology, he said you have to be idle and rich to go out with a pair of binoculars and a camera to just look at birds. But he said he wanted to disprove that during his lifetime. He said that no, it's not just an idle pastime. It is a very valuable exercise and very valuable science. So these radio broadcasts were actually gleaned from all the notes that he took during all these journeys. He used to keep meticulous notes about the temperature that day and what he saw and how the interaction between birds and plants, interaction between birds and other animals, interaction between birds and people. So he noted all these things, and the radio talks are gleaned from that. That is why we talk so much about his life, his travels, and all that. So, how does he, what the contents of this book, since we're talking about the book today? So, in that, he talks about a phenomenal variety of subjects, and we'll just go through some of them in a very superficial way. So, he talks about resident birds, the birds that live in India that don't migrate out. They breed here, they live here, they are here throughout the year. So he talks about them, and many of these are very common birds that we see around us. The woodpeckers and the tree pies and the barbets and the orioles. We see all these around us if we are lucky. And then he was fascinated by nesting birds, and his particular interest was the baya, weaver bird, because he just was so taken up with the way this little bird can pick up fibers and weave this basket like nest for itself and for to bring up its chicks. And here he's found a sort of a freak nest which is like 5 feet tall, and this of course a freak. It's not a normal nest, but his interest was so great in that, and he was amazed. And always, actually, throughout his talks, his writing, he brings out the wonder of everything. He doesn't just make it into a boring science. He makes it into something magnificent. And then talks about the seasons. In different seasons, what do you see? What do you see in the monsoons? What do you see in the summer? And this is the pied cuckoo, which is supposed to be the harbinger of the monsoons. If you hear the pied cuckoo, you know the monsoon is coming soon. And it also, like any other cuckoos, it lays its eggs in babbler's nest, in some other bird's nest, and that bird brings it up as its own baby. Then another favorite topic of his, which really he wanted to emphasize greatly, was birds in the agricultural landscape. He called it agricultural ornithology. He called it economic ornithology, and he instituted that as a subject. In fact, show how economically important birds are. Like if you're going, say, for a drive somewhere, in the outskirts of your city, or if you're going for a drive somewhere, you'll see this flash of blue. You say, oh, how beautiful, it's an Indian roller. Or you see a cute white egret and you say, oh, look at it, baby, it's so sweet and all that. And then you look at a beautiful, you know, eagle, or you see a kite, and you say it's beautiful. It's true, they're all beautiful. But what he wants to emphasize, apart from their beauty, they are actually doing a service. And that is what he wanted to, he also talks about in his now. If you just take one bird, this white-throated kingfisher, and you can see it consumes all these insects, and these are all insects that are affecting crops. They affect cotton, they affect paddy, they affect all our crops. These are insect pests. And this white-throated kingfisher, it eats all these. So you can see that, every white-throated kingfisher is doing some service to the agriculturist, to the farmer, and it has a great value in that. Then he talks about the birds of prey. He's particularly fond of them, and because they are very big controllers of rats and mice, which, as we all know, are really dangerous creatures for agriculture, and even in cities, they can be quite dangerous to us. So, look what he says. He says, I'm going to read what he says. Is due to superstitious prejudice and ill-founded allegations against owls and diurnal birds of prey, man axes his own legs, as it were. Their senseless destruction deprives agriculture and forestry of the services of some of man's staunchest allies in the ceaseless battle against the fecund tribe of rats and other scourges like the locust. So these all control all these pests, and to such a great extent, they are helping the farmer and us as well. So he talks about the water birds and what is their role. So their role, of course, is to fertilize the water body in which they are. And the guano is full of nitrogen and phosphorus and all the usual, fertilizers. So they really help the farmers by the farmers draw out the water and use it in their farms, and they can save quite a lot of money on fertilizers. And the very curious thing, if you see this tern, there's a picture of a tern on the right top there. It's not this particular tern. There's another tern in Lakshadweep, which is supposed to be the indicator of fish. So when the fisher folks see a bunch of terns hovering over the sea, they know where to head, because the terns eat a particular type of small fish, which are called sprats, and the tuna eat the same. So where the sprats are, the tuna are. So the fishermen and the birds are there. So the fishermen can go straight there instead of wasting time, scouring the whole sea. So it's very interesting. The value of birds is in different settings is quite fascinating that way. So he called it economic ornithology, and the usefulness of birds, the pollinators, the insect pest controllers, the seed dispersers, the fertilizing aspects of birds. This is Vedantangal picture out here, where all the white spots are the birds that are nesting out there. And the water is drained out. I mean, the farmers around use that water very well. But Salim Ali was never biased. He never said that all birds are fabulous and need to be only encouraged. He was very conscious that some birds were very destructive to agriculture, like the rose-ringed parakeets and even sparrows. And so he sympathized with farmers. He says that, yeah, how can I not sympathize with a farmer who's lost like 10% of his crop to birds, whether it's corn or wheat or paddy, they can. So, but he calls them Jekyll and Hyde birds, because in part their lifetime they are very good, because especially sparrows, they feed their young with high protein food, which is caterpillars and insects. And so at that time of their life, they are very beneficial. But when they become adults, they start eating the seeds. So they are Jekyll and Hyde birds, he calls them. And he wants farmers to find ways of protecting their crops without kind of eradicating the birds. We know what happened in China when they eradicated sparrows. So he was very conscious of not eradicating any species but controlling them. Similarly, with birds in the cities, the pigeons and the crows have become overabundant, and overabundance is always not a good thing. And they carry diseases, and they crowd out other birds. So, coming to another subject that he talked about, which he talks with great, awe, is the bird migration. And we know about the Arctic tern and its annual journey of 22,000 kilometers uh, one way from the Arctic to the Antarctic every year. And it goes back again. This bird is hardly the size of a pigeon, but it can do that. So, how does it do that, and why does it do that? These are all questions that are sometimes still unanswered. Scientists are still figuring it out using various techniques that are much more modern now from what Salim Ali learned those days. He used to do bird banding, and through banding, they put a ring around the foot of the, around the ankle of the bird, and then wherever it goes, it can be identified where it's come from. So it's quite fantastic that not only the Arctic tern, but so many birds that come right here to Chennai and to Tamil Nadu and to the southern part of India, they have come from very far away. You can see these flight paths where they come from, and Salim Ali was the first person who in India who actually took the trouble to find out where the migrant birds of India come from. And you can see, look where they come from Mongolia and from northern Russia. They all come to northern India and to southern India. So it's extraordinary how they do that. And he talks with great wonder about them and how their brains, we call bird brains, but the bird brain can really store a lot of genetic material. It's all, is it learned? He asked the question, is it learned? Do the chicks follow their parents or what? But then finally he's come to the conclusion that it is genetically ingrained in their brains where they're going to go. So it's a very fascinating subject he talks about. For instance, the bar-headed goose, it needs, what does it need? It needs a cold, pristine lake to breed. So it has to breed either in Tibet or in if it's in our area, or in say in Lahore Spiti, or in Ladakh or Himachal or in Sikkim, in those high lakes. It breeds there. But when those lakes get frozen, it has to come down to the peninsula. So it needs both that. It needs those cold lakes and it needs our warm lakes as well. So, and they cross over the Himalaya, and how they do it, these are all still mysteries that have yet to be resolved. So the next subject he talks about is extinction. And he's extremely passionate about this subject of extinction. We all know the dodo. It got extinct, and it's even now we say there is a dodo, but it's not an Indian bird at all. It was a Mauritius bird. But what is interesting was that in this picture is particularly interesting, which I would like to share with you, particularly because it's intact and the culture and the nature part is so fascinating here, that the Mughal emperors, particularly Jahangir, used to have a menagerie, and visiting dignitaries and royals used to bring animals from their countries to add to his menagerie. And he had wonderful artists like Ustad Mansoor, this is actually attribute to Mansoor, who could who would make very accurate, absolutely accurate uh, uh, pictures of these creatures. So this is one of the most. There was this. I mean, the dodo got extinct much before the time of photography. So these precious records are the only way in which we know what a dodo looked like. And so Dr. Salim Ali was very fascinated by this. He wrote a lot about it. He doesn't talk about it in his these particular radio talks, but he does write about the emperors, the Mughal emperors, and their interest in animals and birds. So, but he was extremely concerned about extinction, and in our country, two species that we know have got extinct, called the Himalayan quail and the pink-headed duck, have got extinct. And he's very concerned that others should not get extinct. Like the great Indian bustard is sort of teetering now, and white-winged duck is teetering. And we know vultures also have declined a great deal. I mean, I remember 30 years ago or whatever, in Chennai, you look up in the sky, there were so many vultures along with the kites. They were circling all the time. But now you look up in the sky, there's not even one vulture. They've all disappeared. So these are all matters of great concern. And so surprisingly, he also talked about animals. He talked about Indian animals in his radio talk. I think he was requested by All India Radio to talk about our wildlife because they wanted to attract foreign tourists to come. And let me tell you, those days they were trying to attract foreign hunters to come. So Salim Ali says, hunting a hangul is very exciting. Come and get it. And it is a bit shocking for me to read that, and shocking for everybody to read it perhaps. But it was in those times, 1940s, 1950s. It was very accepted, and in fact, the Indian government was wanting people to come and do some hunting out here. But he, when he saw the decline in our wildlife and birds, he put his gun down. Salim Ali, he was so contemporary with the times. In the 50s, what he said, he completely changed his mind in the 70s and the 80s. He didn't hunt at all. He said, not because I don't enjoy hunting. Honestly, he says, not because I don't enjoy, but I see the big decline and I don't want to hunt any longer for that. So again, Salim Ali's in the writing in his radio talks, he talks about the bird and its ecosystem. So these are all the ecosystems that we looked at earlier in India, and he would have ideally liked them to be in some good condition. But if we see what is happening now, if we look at our ecosystem now, even during his lifetime, he was extremely distressed by it. And look what he says. He says, time is running out for man, and he must realize that his body, like that of other animals, is subject to narrow physical and chemical constraints, and that however intellectually versatile he may be, he could become a victim of ecological disaster, just as any other animal, if he refuses to pay heed to the warnings of a misused natural ecosystem. So this is all inappropriate land use. There's land use, there's good land use and inappropriate. So he looks at all the inappropriate land use. A natural system that works under fixed natural laws. And to us in India especially, this is writing on the wall. So he uses really very powerful language when it comes to conserving the habitats of birds and the natural habitats of India. And he's very, he's quite distressed by what is happening. So what was his vision? His vision was that what is now required is the understanding of the fact that human ecology is an integral part of nature conservation. And those who take a total view of life on earth must realize that man's future cannot be considered separately from other forms of life. So he really wants to emphasize that humans and other forms of life are all part of one huge ecological system, and we cannot separate ourselves, however intellectually bright we may be, because our bodies are still, biological animal bodies. So we know that birds have been in human consciousness for millennia, and they have inspired art, it inspired music, it inspired sculpture and dance, and every form of art has birds have inspired. And this picture is really an extraordinary picture of a bird that has been carved out of a mammoth ivory, mammoth's tooth. So those days, humans who were living along with the mammoths, they had the art in them to actually carve out a bird from the mammoth's tooth, which is, I thought, phenomenal. And of course, today we have, the tree of life and so many different ways in which birds are portrayed in art, in literature, in poetry, in dance, in music, and in every possible way. So finally, birds do need their space, and we need to let them have their space even alongside where we live. And why not? So when you think of man and nature, it came very powerfully during the COVID times, when a lot of people actually took to bird watching outside their windows, and they found some connect, with a squirrel or a bird or a flower. I mean, they were inside their houses all the time, cooped up and locked up and lonely. And I think these little creatures outside gave them some solace. And it is recorded. In fact, people have written about it, that it is actually, during the lockdown time, these outside their windows, they got some solace from what they saw. And so let's just, so now Salim Ali was not always the strict person who talked in this powerful language, saying we're axing our feet, we're doing this and that. He also used to burst into lyrical language every now and then in the radio talks. You can see suddenly he'll suddenly spout some really beautiful language. He'll say, that birds look like that they were glistening like gems in the sunshine. He'll talk like that, or he'll say that the beauty of their forms and their coloring, the vivacity of their movements, the buoyancy of their flight, and the sweetness of their song. He wanted people to love birds, love nature, at the same time know about it. So, and he talks about the magpie robin and the fluty call of the oriole and the whistle of the iora and the brain fever bird and the quail, all these birds. So, in conclusion, let's listen to some of these bird calls and see. Let's share what he really enjoyed. And so, this is the magpie robin, and I hope it comes up. That's the call of the magpie. And then we'll go to the oriole. I'm sure we hear this sometimes. And of course, this is very familiar to all of us. We hear a lot of that. Well, that's the male and that's the female. The spotted one is the female. And this one, which Salim Ali really talks about, the merry tinkling warble of the fantail. This is quite a rare bird. And it has this very cute little call, which let's show you. So that is it. And so finally, his words for birds were really to ensure that there's a safe future for birds and consequentially for us as well. So that is it. So thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm sorry I was a bit late coming in, but that was one fascinating talk, and I'm so glad I was here to even listen to. Please sit down. I think, but for the likes of Dr. Salim Ali and his proteges, like Ms. Gandhi here, we would have all thought the topic of birds was for the birds. So I'm glad we moved from that mindset. There is a lot of awareness about sparrows locally. Before we go any further, are there any questions from anyone in the audience? Any questions, anyone?
Any audio recordings of his talks?
We've actually been searching to see if you can find these, because right from 41 to 85, they are there. So people are quite sort of cynical. They're saying all the radio must have recorded on top of those tapes. They must have been tapes, those days. So at the moment we don't have any recordings of these. But what there is available is some kind of, he has spoken in many fora. And those are there. He actually, somebody's recorded, Bittu Saigal has recorded a sort of a biographical interview over about 10 sessions. And that is there. His voice is there, his talking about himself is there. But these particular talks, no. We've not been able to find it. We're looking so hard. Yeah.
So where do what is the book recording then? Your book?
Yeah. So this is the typescripts. This is
From his script, is it?
Yeah,
okay,
he used to type out what he's going to talk about.
Okay.
He would type it out and then read it out on the All India Radio.
Okay.
So the scripts are there. Luckily, he has kept them all, and BNHS has scanned them archived them all.
Okay.
So they were able to send it to me. And in fact, it was my COVID lockdown project, because everything came online and I was able to, sort them out and, transcribe them and put them
What you
together.
said there really was very relevant. I think during the lockdown period, just looking out of your window or your balcony and seeing birds was therapeutic almost. It was, it was kind of meditative because suddenly you lack human company. So the next thing you're looking for is anything that moves, which is not a car and is not, giving out petrol fumes. So that was a good time. Any other questions? Yes, please.
I never had the opportunities that you had to go out birding with him one to one. A couple of times in a group. But I knew him well, and I remember your two-volume book in which you wrote about his fondness for snacks.
I can't hear you very well. Yeah, sorry? His fondness for snacks. Ah, yes.
Yeah. Just wanted to know if you could say something about his personal traits.
Yeah.
You see, I knew him.
Yes.
I knew him well, but I never had those chances you had
Yeah.
to go birding
I
one to
know.
one
Yes,
with him.
that was something special. Yeah.
And I remember that you wrote in that two-volume
Yeah.
anthology about his fondness for snacks and tea and those sort of personal traits.
Sure. Well, if I may give a personal uh, uh, incident that happened. Uh, Incident happened, soon after I finished my master's degree under Salim Ali. Of course, I had a party, and I won. And he was in Delhi. I was in Delhi at that time, and he came home, and we had lunch and all that. And so after lunch, I served dahi in a katori, little katoris. So he took it with great interest, and he started eating it. Then as soon as he ate it, he looked so disappointed. I was so kind of shocked. Said, "Why is he so disappointed? Is he very sour, or what's the matter?" He said, "I thought it was ice cream." Yeah, no, he just loved ice cream apparently, and he loved ice cream, and then he was always ready for a snack. He's always ready, and once, in fact, we were driving down the East Coast Road, and my study plot was on the ECR, and so we got up at 5 in the morning or whatever to go there, and his niece is Zai Whitaker, who married Rom Whitaker. Yeah, so they were living at that time over there near the Croc Bank. So we were about 6 or 7 of us. He just barged in and said, "I want breakfast." So he just demanded breakfast from his niece Zai, and poor thing, she was beating up eggs and feeding all of us for. So he really enjoyed it, and I think he used to carry peanuts and things with him all the time and keep snacking on them. Yeah, he enjoyed that. And the other personal trait that he had, which was very valuable to all his students and to me, was that he would befriend us. He'd be extremely strict with us. He would blast us if we went wrong, which is very often, of course. And he would correct spelling mistakes and commas and everything. And then he even, I've got a letter which he said, "You're a dilettante. You are not, you, oh, I can't even tell you about that." So he nearly, I thought he was not going to continue with me. He was so strict. But when he came to inspect my study areas, it was all field ornithology, you see, so it all had to be done out. We had to study what was happening in a forest or in a jungle or in a plantation, is where I had to do. He'd come and stay in our house, and then he would, laugh with the children and laugh with us, and he would just be like an uncle in the family, So good, such a good guest. And but the minute we were out there, it was different. So he had a wonderful, that's a fantastic trait, and every student says the same, not only me. And there are pictures of him, cooching the children and all this sort of thing. They're very different from what his, you think of him as some sort of very stern, strict person, but he's not.
Good, good evening. I came a bit late. Sorry. Can you just tell me what he told about peacock?
Actually, he doesn't. I'm sorry, I don't really know what he felt about peacocks, because I think that has happened more now in recent times that the peacocks have multiplied so much that they are actually attacking crops in a very big way. But what he did, but as I said, I only showed two examples about the parakeets and the sparrows. But any bird that was that was attacking crops, he definitely had a view on them, and he felt that they should be controlled, but not eradicated. And he wanted he wanted the crops to be protected by the farmers. So if that was by how by putting nets, by there are different kinds of, there are repellents now, there are all kinds of sounds. You have a sound of a barking dog or various things. They have various methods now of repelling birds, and you have to do that, putting up nets and things like that. But so actually I don't know much detail about peacocks. Yeah. Yes, and this is a big, yes, it's a big quandary, because being the national bird, you can't kill it, and you can't, and also any wild bird is not allowed to be killed. Yeah.
If anyone saw the movie called Kadasi Vivasari, the Tamil movie, I mean, some part of it revolves around the killing of peacocks and how that's illegal and things like that. Yeah. Any other questions, anyone? Okay. Thank you for a fascinating evening. Thank you for enlightening us on a topic of which I think I personally knew very little, but we're going away enriched. Thank you very much. I think we should all be glad for someone like Ms. Gandhi. And on behalf of INTACH, I think Sujata will, you have a gift for her? What we really need is for children to hear more of this sort of thing, and I hope one day that will happen. Thank you very much. I think the glass is reflecting. Thank you for all the facilities that Ashwita has made available to us. And thank you all very much for coming. No evening really feels good unless there is a house full like this. Thank you all very much and good night.